A little Apache girl survives something no one can explain. And when a rancher finds her beside a burned wagon, he makes a decision that will change his and his wife's life forever. But what they don't know is that this simple act of kindness will spark a storm that could destroy everything they've built. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Arizona Territory, 1876. The merciless summer sun beat down on the parched earth as Thomas Miller guided his horse along the dusty trail leading back to his ranch. The cattle drive had been successful, but the journey home felt longer than usual. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, his wife of 15 years, waiting at home. Their inability to have children had cast a shadow over their marriage, though their love remained steadfast. As Thomas crested the hill overlooking Willow Creek, he noticed a plume of black smoke rising in the distance. Alarm shot through him. "Whoa, boy," he said, pulling back on the reins. He squinted against the harsh sunlight. The smoke was coming from the Eastern Trail Apache territory. "Damn it," he muttered, turning his horse toward the disturbance. Tensions with the Apache had been high lately, with raids becoming more frequent as settlers encroached further into their lands. 20 minutes later, Thomas approached the source of the smoke cautiously. The remains of a wagon smoldered before him, its contents scattered across the dirt. Bodies lay motionless, a man and woman, presumably settlers, riddled with arrows. Thomas dismounted, his hand resting on his revolver as he surveyed the grisly scene. A soft whimper caught his attention. Careful not to make any sudden movements, Thomas followed the sound to find a small figure huddled beneath the overturned wagon. A child no more than 5 years old, with dark hair and frightened eyes, peered back at him. To his surprise, the child was clearly Apache. "Well, I'll be damned," Thomas whispered. He crouched down, extending his hand slowly. "It's all right, little one, I won't hurt you." The girl flinched away, eyes wild with fear. She clutched a small handmade doll to her chest. What happened here? Thomas wondered aloud, looking back at the bodies. The attack patterns weren't typical of Apache raids. Something didn't add up. After several failed attempts to coax the child out, Thomas finally removed his hat and sat down in the dirt, keeping his distance. "I'm just gonna sit here for a spell, if that's all right with you," he said softly. "My name's Thomas. Thomas Miller." An hour passed in silence. The girl watched him warily, occasionally glancing at the bodies nearby with a mixture of fear and confusion in her eyes. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, she inched forward. "That's it," Thomas encouraged. "I ain't gonna hurt you, little one." When she finally emerged, Thomas could see she was malnourished and exhausted. Her clothing was a mixture of traditional Apache garments and what appeared to be a settler's blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Well, now we can't stay here," Thomas said gently. "Those who did this might come back. I've got a ranch not far from here. My wife Sarah, she's the kindest woman you'll ever meet." The girl didn't understand his words, but something in his tone must have reassured her. When Thomas slowly stood and gestured toward his horse, she didn't run. "I need to bury these folks proper," he muttered, looking at the bodies. "But that'll have to wait." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, Thomas Miller lifted the small Apache girl onto his horse and headed toward Willow Creek Ranch, wondering how his wife would react to the unexpected guest he was bringing home and what circumstances had led to this child being alone among dead settlers in the first place. The ride was silent, save for the rhythmic sound of hooves against dirt and the occasional snort from his horse, Maverick. The girl sat rigid before him, still clutching her doll. Thomas found himself speaking softly, more to fill the silence than anything else. "My Sarah, she's always had a soft spot for those in need," he said. "Few years back, we took in 3 stray pups during a blizzard. She nursed them all through the night." He smiled at the memory. "Reckon she'd do the same for you, little one." The lights of Willow Creek Ranch appeared in the distance as night fell completely. Thomas could make out the silhouette of his wife on the porch, no doubt watching for his return. His heart tightened. How would she react? "Thomas?" Sarah called out as they approached. "Thomas, is that you?" "It's me, Sarah," he replied, pulling Maverick to a stop before the house. "And I've brought someone with me." Sarah Miller stepped down from the porch, her brow furrowed with confusion. When her eyes fell upon the child, she gasped. "Thomas Miller." "What on earth?" "Found her by a burned wagon, about 10 miles east," he explained quickly. "Settlers dead. She was hiding underneath. Don't know how she got there or what happened exactly." Sarah's expression softened immediately. She approached slowly, her blue eyes fixed on the frightened child. "Hello there, little one," she said, gently extending her hand. "You poor thing. You must be so scared." The girl stared back, still clutching her doll. "She's Apache, Sarah," Thomas said quietly. Sarah's eyes met his. "I can see that, Thomas." She turned back to the child. "It doesn't matter. She needs help." Dawn broke over Willow Creek Ranch, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise while stirring a pot of cornmeal mush. Behind her, the Apache girl sat at the table, still clutching her doll, her dark eyes taking in every movement Sarah made. "You must have a name," Sarah said softly, placing a bowl of the steaming mush before the child. She pointed to herself. "I'm Sarah." Then she gestured to the girl. "And you are?" The child remained silent, though her eyes reflected understanding. She was intelligent, Sarah could tell, just frightened and confused. Thomas entered the kitchen, hat in hand. "Sheriff Rogers is riding out to where I found her. Says he'll investigate and see if he can make sense of what happened." Sarah nodded, sitting beside the girl and encouraging her to eat. "What do we do with her, Thomas? If her family is out?" "There. The Apache bands have mostly been pushed south or onto reservations," Thomas replied, pouring himself coffee. "But I'll ask around. Maybe someone knows something." He watched the child cautiously eat the mush. "In the meantime, she stays here." "Of course she does," Sarah said firmly. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Over the following days, the girl gradually began to trust them. She followed Sarah around the ranch, watching as she tended the vegetable garden, fed the chickens, and prepared meals. Though she didn't speak, her expressions became more animated, and occasionally, Sarah caught glimpses of a smile. On the 4th day, while hanging laundry, Sarah began to hum softly. To her surprise, the girl's clear voice suddenly joined in. Matching the melody perfectly, Sarah gasped, then smiled warmly. "So you do have a voice, little one." The girl looked down shyly, but didn't retreat as she might have days earlier. "Music speaks to all hearts, doesn't it?" Sarah continued hanging sheets, resuming her humming. Again, the child joined in. That evening, Thomas returned from town with news. Sheriff found tracks around the wagon boot prints, not moccasins. "And the arrows?" He lowered his voice so the girl wouldn't hear. "They weren't Apache arrows. Someone wanted it to look like an Indian attack." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Why would anyone do such a thing? Land disputes, most likely." "That area's been contested. Make it look like Apache, and no one asks questions." Thomas glanced at the girl, who was sitting by the fireplace, drawing patterns in the ashes with a stick. "Sheriff's asking around about missing Apache children. Nothing so far." "Thomas," Sarah said hesitantly, "I've been thinking. If no one claims her." He met his wife's eyes, seeing the hope there. "Sarah, you know it won't be easy. Folks around here, they have strong feelings about the Apache." "When has anything worth doing ever been easy?" she challenged. "She has no one, Thomas. And we," her voice caught, "we have so much love to give." Before Thomas could respond, a small voice spoke. "Naya." They both turned to see the girl watching them intently. "What did you say, child?" Sarah asked softly. Naya, she repeated, pointing to herself. My name Naya. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she knelt before the child. Naya, it's a beautiful name. As summer turned to fall, Naya became more communicative, speaking a mixture of Apache words and the English she was quickly learning from Sarah and Thomas. She helped with chores, showed Sarah how to weave baskets the Apache way, and gradually, her nightmares became less frequent. But not everyone in the nearby town of Copper Springs was pleased with the miller's new addition. When Thomas took Naya with him to purchase supplies one September afternoon, whispers followed them down the street. That's Miller with that Apache child, someone murmured. He found her by some massacred settlers. Probably grow up to be just like the rest. Oh, femme. Thomas kept Naya close, his jaw tight with anger. At the general store, the proprietor, Harold Jenkins, served them with obvious reluctance. Folks are talking, Thomas, Jenkins said quietly as he wrapped parcels of sugar and flour. Taking in an Indian child, it ain't natural. Neither is leaving a helpless child to die in the desert, Thomas replied evenly. My conscience is clear, Harold. As they left the store, a group of men blocked their path. The leader, Frank Wilson, a cattle rancher known for his hatred of the Apache, spat on the ground near Naya's feet. You're making a mistake, Miller. He growled. That savage'll bring nothing but trouble. Thomas moved Naya behind him. Step aside, Frank. The child has done nothing wrong. Her kind killed my brother 2 years ago, Wilson snarled. Cut him to pieces while he was still breathing. She's a child, Thomas said firmly. Whatever grievances you have with the Apache, they ain't hers to bear. For a tense moment, it seemed Wilson might escalate the confrontation. Then Sheriff Rogers appeared, hand resting casually on his holster. Everything all right here, gentlemen? Wilson backed down, but his parting words lingered. This ain't over, Miller. That child don't belong here. On the ride home, Naya was unusually quiet. Finally, she looked up at Thomas with solemn eyes. They hate Naya because Naya is Apache? Thomas's heart ached at the question. Some people hold on to hatred because it's easier than understanding, he explained carefully. But you don't need to worry about them. You're safe with us. Sarah says Creator makes all people, Naya replied thoughtfully. All same inside, Thomas smiled, impressed by her wisdom. Sarah's right about that. When they arrived home, Sarah immediately sensed something was wrong. After Naya went to feed the chickens, Thomas recounted the confrontation in town. It's only going to get harder, he warned. Wilson has influence. Sarah's expression hardened with determination. Then we'll be stronger. Naya is family now, Thomas. I won't let anyone hurt her. That night, as Sarah tucked Naya into bed, the child asked, Can Naya stay forever? Sarah smoothed back the girl's dark hair, her heart full. If that's what you want, then yes, Naya can stay forever. Naya wants, the child whispered, her eyes drifting closed. Naya wants family. Winter descended on Willow Creek Ranch, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. Inside the warm cabin, Naya sat at the kitchen table, carefully forming letters on a slate while Sarah prepared stew for dinner. 6 months had passed since Thomas had found her, and the child was thriving under the miller's care. Very good, Naya, Sarah praised, glancing at the neat row of letters. Your writing is improving every day. Naya beamed at the compliment. Teacher says Naya learns fast. Sarah nodded, remembering their first tentative visit to the schoolhouse in November. The teacher, Miss Abigail Palmer, had been surprisingly accepting, agreeing to give Naya lessons 3 times a week, despite the disapproval of some parents. You have a quick mind, Sarah agreed. Now, can you read back what you've written? Naya carefully sounded out the words. The snow falls soft and white like feathers from the sky. Perfect, Sarah smiled, stirring the bubbling pot. You'll Be reading novels before spring arrives. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air as Thomas stomped in, shaking snow from his hat. Getting worse out there, he announced. Might be in for a real blizzard. Naya rushed to greet him, throwing her arms around his waist. Thomas's initial awkwardness with physical affection had long since melted away, and he lifted her high, making her giggle. "And how's my girl today?" he asked, setting her down. "Learning your letters?" "Naya can write about snow," she declared proudly, pulling him toward her slate dot. As Thomas admired Naya's handiwork, Sarah noticed the tension in his shoulders. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly when Naya returned to her writing. Thomas lowered his voice. "Wilson and his men were in town today. Drunk and talking loud about Indian sympathizers. Sheriff Rogers warned me to keep an eye out." Sarah's hand tightened on the wooden spoon. "They wouldn't dare come here." "Probably not," Thomas agreed. "But I'll keep the rifle loaded, just in case." That night, as the wind howled around the cabin and snow piled against the windows, they gathered by the fireplace. Thomas worked on mending a bridle while Sarah taught Naya to knit. The domestic scene was so perfect, so natural, that sometimes Sarah had to remind herself that just months ago, Naya had been a traumatized, silent child found beside a burned wagon. "Tell story?" Naya requested, setting down her knitting needles. "Which one would you like to hear?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Coyote and the Stars," Naya replied predictably. It was an Apache tale she had shyly shared with Sarah weeks ago, and now she loved hearing Sarah retell it. As Sarah began the familiar story, Thomas watched them both, his heart full. He had never imagined himself as a father, especially not to an Apache child. But now he couldn't picture their lives without Naya. He had already begun teaching her to ride, and she took to it naturally, as if born in the saddle. The blizzard continued for 3 days, keeping them snug inside the cabin. On the 4th morning, Thomas woke to crystal-clear skies and the daunting task of digging out. After breakfast, he and Naya bundled up to check on the livestock. "Animals need us in snow," Naya declared seriously, her breath fogging in the frigid air. "That they do," Thomas agreed, trudging through knee-deep drifts toward the barn. As they approached, Thomas suddenly stopped, his hand going to Naya's shoulder. The barn door stood ajar, though he distinctly remembered securing it against the storm. "Naya," he said quietly, "run back to the house. Tell Sarah to get the rifle." Something in his tone made Naya obey without question. She turned and raced back through their footprints toward the cabin. Thomas approached the barn cautiously, wishing he'd brought his gun. As he pushed the door wider, the hinges creaked ominously. Inside, the horses shifted nervously, and Thomas immediately saw why. Frank Wilson stood in the center of the barn, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. "Morning, Miller," Wilson drawled, his breath reeking of whiskey even at this early hour. "Thought we'd pay you a friendly visit." "Nothing friendly about breaking into a man's barn," Thomas replied evenly, keeping his distance. "What do you want?" "Frank," Wilson stepped forward, his face twisted with malice. "We want you to understand the mistake you're making, harboring that Apache brat. Her people are murderers, every last one of them." "She's a child," Thomas countered, his anger rising. "And she's under my protection," one of Wilson's men snorted. "Protection? She'll slit your throats in your sleep once she's old enough." "You need to leave," Thomas said firmly. "Now." Wilson took another step forward. "Or what, Miller? You're outnumbered." "Not exactly," came Sarah's steady voice from the barn entrance. She stood with the rifle raised, Naya partially hidden behind her skirts. "I'm only going to say this once, Wilson. Get off our land." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Wilson spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Millers. That child has blood on her hands, whether you want to see it or not." "The only blood I see is what I'll spill if you don't start walking," Sarah replied, her aim unwavering, Wilson and his men eventually backed down, mounting their horses and riding away across the snow-covered fields. Once they were gone, Thomas embraced Sarah, his heart pounding. That was dangerous coming out here. What was I supposed to do? Let them hurt you? Sarah lowered the rifle, her hands shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. Naya looked up at them, her dark eyes filled with understanding beyond her years. They came because of Naya. Thomas knelt before her. They came because they're ignorant men filled with hate. None of this is your fault, you understand? That evening, after Nia was asleep, Thomas and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, speaking in hushed tones. We could report Wilson to the sheriff, Sarah suggested. Thomas shook his head. And what proof do we have? It would just make things worse. Then what do? We protect our daughter, Thomas said simply. And we teach her to be proud of who she is, both Apache and part of this family. Sarah reached across the table to take his hand. I've been thinking, Thomas. We should make it official, adopt Naya legally. No one has come forward to claim her, and it's been 6 months. Thomas nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same. We'll ride into town next week, speak to Judge Parker about the paperwork. Outside, the night was still and clear, stars glittering above the snow-covered ranch. Inside, despite the lingering threat of Wilson and his men, the Miller family found a moment of peace in their decision, a commitment to the future they would build together, whatever challenges might come. Spring came to Arizona territory in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The adoption papers for Nia Miller had been filed with Judge Parker, though the process moved slowly through the territorial bureaucracy. Meanwhile, life at Willow Creek Ranch continued its steady rhythm, with Naya growing more confident and settled with each passing day. One warm April morning, Thomas announced at breakfast, I need to ride to Prescott for supplies. Should be gone 3 days, maybe 4. Sarah nodded, passing him another biscuit. We'll manage fine, won't we, Naya? Naya looked up from her plate. Can Naya come too? See Big Town? Thomas hesitated. Prescott was larger than Copper Springs, with more people and more potential for trouble. But the hopeful look in Naya's eyes made his resistance crumble. Well, I suppose it would be educational, he conceded with a smile. Sarah, would you like to make it a family trip? Sarah's face lit up. I haven't been to Prescott in over a year. I could visit the dressmaker, perhaps get some fabric for new curtains. And so it was decided. The next morning, they set out in the wagon, Naya seated between Thomas and Sarah, practically vibrating with excitement. The journey would take most of the day, with plans to stay at the Grand Hotel for 2 nights while Thomas conducted his business. As they traveled, Naya peppered them with questions about Prescott. How big was it? Were there many children? Did they have a school like in Copper Springs? Prescott has several schools, Sarah explained. And a courthouse and shops of all kinds, you'll see. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill and Prescott came into view. In the valley below, a proper town with wooden sidewalks, brick buildings, and the territorial capital standing proudly at its center. Naya's eyes widened. So many houses, Thomas chuckled, that it is. Now remember what we talked about, stay close to either me or Sarah at all times. Some folks might not be used to seeing an Apache child with white parents. Naya nodded solemnly. At 8 years old, their best guess at her age, she understood more than most children about the complexities of the world she inhabited. They checked into the Grand Hotel, drawing curious glances but no outright hostility. After settling into their room, they ventured out to explore the town before dinner. Naya held tightly to Sarah's hand, taking in the sights and sounds of Prescott with wide-eyed wonder. At a confectionery shop, Thomas bought Naya her first piece of store-bought candy, a striped peppermint stick that she declared the most delicious thing in all the world. The evening passed pleasantly, with dinner at the hotel restaurant, followed by an early night, all 3 tired from the journey. The next morning, Thomas set off to meet with suppliers while Sarah took Naya to visit the dressmaker and other shops. At the dressmaker's, Madame Beaumont initially raised an eyebrow at Naya, but warmed considerably when the child admired her fabrics with genuine appreciation, even identifying some of the dyes as similar to those used by Apache women. "She has a good eye," Madame Beaumont remarked to Sarah, "and speaks very well for her age." "She's a quick learner," Sarah replied proudly. "Reads almost as well as children twice her age." As they left the shop with parcels of fabric and notions, Sarah noticed a familiar figure across the street, Frank Wilson, dismounting his horse outside the territorial offices. She quickly pulled Naya into a side alley. "What wrong?" Naya asked, sensing Sarah's tension. "Nothing to worry about," Sarah assured her, though her heart raced. "I just thought we might take the back streets to the bookshop." They spent the remainder of the morning avoiding the main thoroughfare, eventually meeting Thomas for lunch as planned. Sarah mentioned seeing Wilson, and Thomas frowned. "He does business in Prescott occasionally. Let's hope our paths don't cross." That afternoon, while Sarah rested at the hotel, Thomas took Naya to the livery stable where he needed to negotiate for a new workhorse. The stable owner, Jeremiah Hayes, was an old acquaintance. "Thomas Miller, as I live and breathe." Hayes greeted him warmly. "And who's this little lady?" "This is my daughter, Naya," Thomas said, the words coming naturally now. "Naya, this is Mr. Hayes, one of the finest horsemen in the territory." Hayes glanced at Naya, registering her Apache features with mild surprise, but no apparent prejudice. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Naya. Your pa here tells me you're quite the rider already." Naya nodded shyly. "I like horses. They understand feelings." "Wisest words I've heard all day," Hayes chuckled. "Want to see a new foal while you're paying I talk business?" Naya looked to Thomas for permission, and at his nod, followed Hayes to a stall where a wobbly-legged foal nursed from its mother. Her delight was evident, momentarily making Thomas forget his concerns about Wilson's presence in town. Their business concluded successfully. Thomas and Naya headed back toward the hotel. As they rounded a corner near the town square, Thomas stopped abruptly. Frank Wilson stood with several men outside the courthouse, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with a territorial official. "Let's go another way," Thomas murmured, taking Naya's hand. But it was too late. Wilson had spotted them. "Miller," he called, breaking away from his group. "Fancy seeing you here, and with the savage no less." Thomas positioned himself between Wilson and Naya. "We have no quarrel with you, Frank. We're just passing through." Wilson's eyes narrowed. "Heard. You filed adoption papers. Making it official, are you? Turning your back on your own kind?" "My family is my business," Thomas replied evenly. "Now if you'll excuse us." As they attempted to move past, one of Wilson's companions stepped forward. "You know, Miller, there's still a bounty on Apache scalps in some parts. Territorial government might pay good money for information about Indian whereabouts." Thomas's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. "That's enough." The tension might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of a territorial marshal, who paused to observe the confrontation. Wilson, noticing the lawman, backed down reluctantly. "This isn't over, Miller," he muttered. "That child belongs with her own kind or on the ground with the rest of them." Thomas hurried Naya back to the hotel, his mind racing. Sarah was horrified. When he recounted the encounter, "We should leave first thing tomorrow," she insisted. "I don't trust Wilson not to cause trouble." That night, as Naya slept soundly between them in the hotel bed, Thomas and Sarah whispered their fears and hopes in the darkness. "Maybe we should consider moving," Sarah suggested. "Start fresh somewhere Wilson and his kind can't reach us." Thomas sighed heavily. "Willow Creek is our home, Sarah. I won't be driven away by ignorance and hate." "But Naya's safety is our priority," Thomas finished. which is why I've been thinking about something else entirely. The next morning, before leaving Prescott, Thomas made a detour to the territorial offices. When he emerged an hour later, his expression was more determined than ever. "What did you do?" Sarah asked as they loaded the wagon for the journey home. "I spoke with Judge Parker about expediting our adoption," Thomas explained. "And I filed a formal complaint against Wilson for threats and intimidation. The judge also gave me this." He produced an official-looking document bearing the territorial seal. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Legal protection," Thomas replied, "declaring Naya under the guardianship of the territorial government pending her formal adoption. Anyone interfering with her safety can now be prosecuted under territorial law." Relief washed over Sarah's face. "Will it be enough?" "It's a start," Thomas said. "The rest is up to us." As they traveled homeward, Naya sat between them, singing softly a melody that blended an Apache lullaby with a hymn Sarah had taught her. The sound symbolized everything their unusual family had become, a harmonious meeting of different worlds, creating something new and beautiful in the process. The sun set behind them as Willow Creek Ranch appeared on the horizon. Thomas reached over to squeeze Sarah's hand, their fingers entwining above Naya's dark head. "We're home," he said simply. Naya looked up, her face glowing with contentment. "Home," she repeated. "Naya's home." And in that moment, despite the challenges that surely lay ahead, the Miller family knew they had already won the most important battle. They had found each other, and nothing, not Frank Wilson or the prejudices of the Arizona Territory, could take that away from them.